Tell the world he's returning.
All right. So what's up, guys? Welcome to Counterculture Reacts. My name is Jamie. To my right is our crepuscular worship leader,
Amen.
Joel. Together we want to motivate the church to influence the culture with the kingdom of God by applying a biblical worldview to every single topic.
Amen.
I want to encourage you to subscribe to our Freedom Church NJ YouTube channel, and wherever you listen to podcasts, leave a comment on what you thought, or if you have a topic you'd like us to address. That would be really, really awesome. So do that.
Got some really good comments on our eschatology video from a few weeks ago. And really people just being interested in not just that topic, but learning, and digging in deeper to the scriptures.
So
and we love to see that. So definitely leave us a comment and hopefully leave something that's encouraging. We also have some sponsors. We would be remiss to not talk about them. Born Again Baking from Lucinda Lynch, her homemade bakery. And she made us tonight some amazing pesto cheese balls?
Ball thingies, knots, maybe?
Yeah, knots.
Were they knots?
Kind of like garlic. Yes, they were.
Like garlic knots, but they were super puffy. Like
cream puffs.
Very airy.
Yeah, mix of garlic knots and cream puffs.
They were very tasty.
And a meat sauce. So she does like savory and sweet.
Yeah.
So I think she would say that
she does for us.
Yeah. I think she would say she specializes in
buy stuff from her.
Yeah.
Please.
So bornagainbaking.com. Put CC10 in for 10% off your order. She's a great woman of God, and she comes to Counterculture.
Yeah.
So definitely support her.
Also,
friendsoftodayschoice.org, Women's Resource Center, and want to support them any way that we can. They do awesome work for the kingdom and for women.
Yeah, definitely pray for them, too.
Yeah.
I just got an email from them asking for prayer for a young lady who was coming in who was set on getting an abortion. Like, she was actually upset that they weren't offering an abortion at the place. They encouraged her to get an ultrasound. She saw the baby, cried when she saw the baby, and started to really think it through.
Yeah.
And but was still kind of adamant about the abortion. And so pray for her that she would come back with her boyfriend and make a decision to save the baby's life. So definitely,
Yeah, when we do stuff like this, I mean, we like joking around, obviously, and having fun, but there's a ton of serious things that are going on. Today it's going to be kind of a serious episode as well. And so that's fitting that you brought that up too, just to kind of set the tone, I guess.
Sure.
Because today we're going to be talking about deconstruction, and which is kind of a common, almost fad in social media that's going on in the past couple of years, of people who were brought up in the Christian, especially evangelical world, and are rethinking and going back to seeing if their faith is real or not, and a lot of people leaving the faith and not believing in God anymore, and losing the faith that they once had. So we're going to be reacting to a popular YouTube duo, Rhett and Link, popularly known for their Good Mythical Morning YouTube channel, which is awesome.
It's really good.
It's really good.
It's really good. Yeah.
But they were both brought up in Christian homes and kind of have that, like Baptist, I said the words when I was 13 to be saved and stuff like that. Then got older and started getting some different views brought to them. And then we'll find out, his journey towards now being, I believe, an agnostic.
Yeah,
right?
We'll be watching Rhett tonight, and it's a fairly long video.
Yeah.
And Rhett talks a lot about how it was more than that, just making a confession kind of thing. He was very involved, even preaching at church, when he was older, and leading Bible studies, and so he was defending the faith, throughout. And but there were still things in there that caused him to, he still had questions, and we may all have, I'm sure we all will have questions.
Yeah.
But what do we do with that?
Right. Exactly. So. Yeah. Do we eventually throw away like our faith and our foundation, or do we have the questions, but do we look at both sides? I think that's going to be, for me, one of the biggest things, having dealt with doubts of my own, but also a lot of different beliefs and stuff. Are you willing to look at both sides, the best that the both sides have to offer, to come to a full orbed conclusion, or not? So, but we shall see. So I'm excited to get into it.
All right. Yeah.
So this is, it's called Rhett's Spiritual Deconstruction. And we do hope that if any of you guys, either you or somebody you know, or maybe you're a parent and one of your kids is struggling with the faith, hopefully something that we say, or just you guys thinking deeply about the things that people who have gone this path before have gone into, hopefully it can give you some good ideas on how to defend your faith and what things that would really help them in their struggles. So that's our hope in doing this. So, ready?
Let's do it.
Okay, we're starting 8 minutes in.
Just taking down some notes.
Yeah.
Push this with as much humility as possible. So, that. It is going to get detailed, and I really try to condense it down. But this is like a years long process. I'm going back basically 20 years and kind of telling a lot of different things that happen. But this is not going to be as detailed as some of you might want it to be, and it's going to be more detailed than some of you want it to be.
I like his hair.
Okay. So
you don't. Too crazy.
It's girl.
His
hair is crazy.
His hair is.
You want to hold my hand?
His hair.
If you need that, sure.
My hair is girl.
I'm also going to take notes because I don't want to interrupt you. If there's something I'm thinking, that I'll just jot it down.
Where's your hat?
And if I want you to hold my hand at any point, I will just extend it.
Okay? Oh.
Yeah, I think so.
I'll know that's what
your tree hat?
First of all, even though we
finally got cut down.
I think the squirrel's making a home with it right now.
I think it did before already.
Now, I believe that Jesus was the Son of God, that a personal relationship with him was the only way to be saved, i.e., the only way to go to heaven when you die. And this belief defined everything for me. This was my worldview. It gave me purpose and meaning. And I lived with this knowledge of this spiritual reality, right? There's a spiritual reality that is constantly around us, kind of permeating every decision, every relationship, every conversation. And I want to emphasize how big of a deal it was to me.
Yeah.
It was a relationship. And I want to say that because I've noticed that when I tell my story, often people kind of conclude that I was never a true Christian, right? And I'm addressing this up front for a couple of reasons. First of all, I understand why people do this, because this is what I did for many years when I had friends who said, I don't really believe that anymore. And I would be like, well, you must have never believed it. You must have never really had a real relationship with Jesus, because according to my particular theology at the time, which was eternal security, which is once you're God's child, you're always God's child, and you can't get away. Once you have faith, you might fall away for a little bit, but you're always going to come back, and you're sealed, you're delivered, you're going to be saved.
Can we pause it?
And
please.
So I want to address just a couple things that he said there. One was that that he had a relationship, right, with Jesus, and you'll see later on as we get into it. It's just something to listen to, and kind of point out, because as the whole thing is about him deconstructing and kind of walking away from the faith. Like, how do you have a relationship with, like what relationship was going on if God's not there? So he's saying I had a real relationship, but now he doesn't believe that Jesus is real, like really God, or so which one is it? You know what I mean?
Right.
So it's, no, you didn't have a real relationship.
Yeah.
Or you did have a real relationship.
And then how is that
but
not
how is he not
real
now?
Still? Yeah.
So
right.
You don't have a real relationship with something that's not there.
Right. Yeah.
So it's just something to think about there.
Yeah, I'll just bring up too.
Yeah.
So there's going to be a lot of things that are true or not true, or real or not real, depending on your biblical interpretation of certain passages.
Sure.
So when he's saying things like, some people would tell me, oh, I just never believed, right? The reason that people would tell him that is because of specific Bible passages that would seem to prove that. Not like, well, you must just not have really believed kind of thing. It's like, well, actually, no, because Scripture says something like when they come to Jesus at the end of Matthew 25, I believe, the sheep and the goats, didn't we do all of these things, right, in your name and stuff like that?
Right.
Like, didn't we know you? And Jesus said, I never knew you.
Right.
Not I knew you once, but now I don't know you anymore.
But he didn't say, and you didn't believe hard enough.
Right,
in me,
right.
You know, or enough in me, kind
Right,
of thing.
but it was, I never knew you.
Yeah.
So passages like that would be taken to be like, okay, let's say I have no idea where Rhett, like, his soul is or was then.
Sure.
But as far as we could tell, if he was in that spot that he says that he was in, right, being in the normal, evangelical situation, to quote Doug in the video, then where he would be, you would say, yeah, he's a Christian, he's a believer. So then would you tell him at that point, oh, you can't walk away from the faith? Like, there's no possible way that you could. The problem is we make things so cut and dry without being able to really see into their heart. And if they really do have a relationship, we can only go by their profession or what they say. And so then if somebody like him, if he really did have that walking the walk kind of a thing, and not just talking the talk, but like doing the things that a Christian does kind of a thing, and then walks away, does that mean that he did know Jesus and now he doesn't know, and Jesus knew him, but now he doesn't know him anymore? Because that would contradict then what Jesus said about, I never knew you, right?
Right.
So now I have no problem saying that he was a true believer, was a believer, and walked the walk and did all of that stuff and then walked away. And so if you wanted to say, okay, so that means that he lost his salvation, you could say that in this category, like this narrow category, but in the sense of he was justified by faith, sealed with the Holy Spirit, the Spirit was inside of him, and he's a new creation, and then he walked away. That's not what I'm saying, that you can lose your salvation in that sense. And because how can a new creation go back to an old creation?
And just the terminology like you're saying that he used, because he used the term faith. It's like, well, believing in Jesus and being born of the Spirit may not be the same thing.
Yeah.
If you're born of the Spirit, which is the necessary thing.
Right.
It's not that it's, and we can parse all the scripture with all this stuff at whatever time, but it's not, if you don't have the Spirit, you're not made alive. You're not a new creation. So you can say with your mouth, right, that Jesus is Lord. But if you don't have that Spirit giving you life, then you are not born again. And so that's like just being careful with the words and all that.
The problem is on both sides of this debate of if you can lose your salvation or not.
That's where it goes.
And like every other debate, pretty much, people don't use enough nuance.
Yeah.
And there's way too much nuance that you have to go into in parsing out all of the biblical passages, and then also how that applies to like the human experience of like, well, I was following Jesus and now I'm not. How does that make me not, like, I was a Christian and now I'm not? And it's like, okay, well, let's parse that out, because you could say that you were walking in the sense of Christianity, but if you lost that, it doesn't mean you lost your relationship with Jesus. It just means you were going along with the people who were doing that, and you even believed probably in like a in some sense, in the superficial sense, all of the story about Jesus and stuff like that. But like you said, it doesn't mean that you were made alive and then walked away, like from that kind of a thing.
Sure.
So, but my point is, all of the nuance that is involved in every single one of the Bible passages, it's just not as cut and dry as a lot of people make these kind of things out to be. So me personally, for where I stand right now, would come down on the side that a true Christian cannot lose their salvation because they're a new believer. like they're a new
creation. Yeah.
Exactly, and they have the Spirit, and then
they're born of the Spirit.
And the one of the nuanced things that people don't get into enough is like, so you're saying like God's forcing me to stay with him kind of a thing, or like I can't leave if I wanted to. It's like, that's not the point. The point is a new creation wants new things. Right. A new creation doesn't want the old life anymore. They still struggle with it. Romans 7, Paul's like, I still struggle with my flesh, but it's a struggle of the flesh. But then he says, who's going to rescue me from this body of death? Because if it's just me, I would walk away.
Right.
But he says, thanks be to God who gives us the victory through Jesus Christ. Goes into Romans 8, there's no condemnation for those who are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit, because we have a new spirit inside of us.
Right.
And so it's not like, oh, it's forcing me. It's like, no, but it's that you have new desires now because you have a new being inside of you. And that's the issue that I would have with, so what happens to that being? Like,
well, it's the adverse to the, I think adverse is the right word. Converse, adverse. I forget which one's in line, but the opposite, we'll say.
Okay.
Or not the opposite, but similar to the drive that we have towards sin because of our nature, our sin nature. When we're born of the Spirit, we have a drive to please God that wasn't there before.
Yeah.
And now we have a drive to do that. It doesn't mean we're like that drive is forcing us to do that.
Right.
It's that, well, now I have a different nature that is kind of pushing me along to desire those things.
Yeah.
And that's, that's a good thing.
Yeah. And all of that, again, is both biblical interpretation. Yeah. Like, that's where we're getting that from. It's not like, oh, I just feel like I want to do good things now, kind of a thing.
Right.
I think that does happen also. Like, it does bear out in reality also. But mainly, like, how do you come down on these Bible passages that say, it is God who works in you to will and to work for his good pleasure? It's like, well, I don't always feel that all the time. So does that mean that it's not like I'm not, you know what I mean? Well, it's like, well, your interpretation of those Bible passages kind of has to run the way that you see your life too. It's not always going to be like whacking you over the head. It's like the Spirit's, leading me in this, sometimes it is, but sometimes it's much more nuanced than that.
Sure.
So, but that's why we have to go with what Scripture is saying as the final authority for that.
Sure.
So,
but this is good for us because it really does ask a lot of those questions.
Yeah.
Like, okay, so, can you lose it, kind of thing.
Right. Yeah.
And then and it forces you to really dig into the Scripture. It forces you to define the terms. That's a good thing.
Yes.
Yeah. And these things, we can be afraid.
Do the hard work.
Yeah. We can be afraid. Like when we watch these as parents, we'll say, like I'm a parent. So
apparently,
as a parent, I could be like afraid. It's not my nature, and I'm not afraid, but I could be when I see stuff like this and be like, oh, well, if it can happen to them, well, what about my kids? They're raised in a Christian home, and what if they start asking these questions? Because he's going to go through a bunch of the things, a lot of the details, and it's very well done. And he's sincere and he's an honest guy. I think he does a great job explaining, know. And but we shouldn't be afraid. But we should do our due diligence to understand what the questions are, and to be able to be the ones that our kids go to, so that we can walk alongside them and help them through this, and not be so critical or so rigid that we would not be able to hear what they have to say, their concerns that they have, because a lot of times that rigidity is what makes a reaction when the young people,
they just want to believe differently than you, because if they don't have a good relationship with you either.
Well, that's true too. But when you are raised a certain way and this is all you ever hear and it's never challenged, and then you have questions because it's not consistent in certain ways, and it could be just how you're taught. It's just not a consistent thing. It's another reason to be as consistent as possible. But then you're just rigid with that. Then they hear something else that kind of answers their concern, like their question, and they're not getting an answer from the church side, but they're getting an answer from the side that's against God, or or just opposite of God, or whatever. It's just not bringing God into it. Yeah, and then it ends up being a reaction, because it's like, well, I'm not getting an answer there, but this is an answer.
Yeah.
And it's like, and then they just hold on to that.
Yeah.
And it's like, no. We should be able to bring them in and say, that's a good question. Let's sit down. Let's talk about that.
Yeah.
So we as parents have a responsibility to do that, and we as Christians have a responsibility to do that, to be able to encourage the younger believers and to, train up a child in the way that they should go.
There it is.
It is not in context, that is not necessarily parents with children.
Yeah.
That is, it just says, train up a child in the way that they should go. That is the responsibility of the older people, to train up the younger people in the way that they should go. And the church should be full of people that the kids could go to and say, yeah, I'm not really sure about this. And well, let's sit down. Let's talk about it. Let's get your parents involved. Let's work through this.
Right.
We shouldn't be afraid of that.
Yeah.
So, but
you should want to be a person that people would want to go to when they have questions like that, instead of, well, he's set in his ways, I know he's not going to really listen to my
right.
my complaints.
Yeah.
Because some are good complaints, like good not
absolutely.
good arguments.
Yeah.
Well, maybe good arguments.
Good questions.
Good questions.
It's like, okay,
right.
Yeah, that's a good question. Let's talk through it.
And there's been questions for 2,000 years, about Christianity and stuff. So it's not like it's new.
Right.
All
right, well, let's plug along.
Yeah, now that we're 1 minute in.
That's a difficult thing for me now, because I got to be honest, it kind of feels very dismissive, right? And I don't think it really accounts for what actually the reality was and is. And so the only thing I'm going to ask is that you just don't reduce me to a theological footnote as you're listening to this story. Because as far as I'm concerned, Jesus was as real to me as he possibly could be without physically manifesting himself in my presence.
Except that now he's not real.
We were in conversation.
So you weren't in conversation.
So
if he's not real.
With that kind of setting the stage, I'm going to get into the story, kind of starting back with my college years. But first, we're going to do an ad break.
Oh, classic.
Go ahead.
Oh, this doesn't work like that. Okay.
A little fast forward action.
Okay. I have always been a naturally skeptical person.
Which is good.
Even in the midst of a very vibrant Christian faith.
Innocence.
I would have doubts. I hear a little something about how the Bible came together, how the 27 books of the New Testament were kind of put together, and the way that, the canon came together. And I would be like, this doesn't seem as clean as maybe I thought that it might have been. I would think a little bit about the resurrection of Jesus, and I'd be like, that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing, but that's the whole point. It's tough. I have faith. And what I would typically do is I would have these sessions where I would sort of rederive my faith, but also I would do what I think a lot of Christians do, is that when you have a doubt about something, you go and you read a Christian expert. We call it apologetics in Christianity, somebody who can basically defend the faith. These are smart people who can they can read Hebrew and Greek, and they've been to seminary, they've written books, and they spend their life studying this stuff, and they put out a lot of material that and they're smarter than me, and they are more knowledgeable than me. So what I would do is I would just go and I would find somebody who was smarter than me, and they would be like, oh no, it's very reasonable to believe this, there's very good reason to believe this. And that would kind of plaster over my doubt in that particular area for a while.
What time frame are you referring to? Are you talking about adulthood, or are you talking about as a kid?
This probably started in high school, was happening a lot in college, and then has happened ever since. Mm-hmm. But in college, I met some people who were really interested in the book of Genesis and were specifically what you call a young earth creationist. So this is someone who believes that the book of Genesis is literal history, and that the implication from that is that the world is between 6,000 and 10,000 years old. That's when this whole thing began. Along with that comes the idea that Noah's flood, like Noah and the ark, that's a true story. And the entire world was flooded like, a few thousand years ago. All the animals were on a boat. And then every single layer of sediment that you see with all the fossils and everything in it is a result of that flood. And this isn't a small group of people. There's a large group of people in evangelical Christianity who believe this, still believe this. I never thought about this. My parents didn't really care much about these particular issues, right? It wasn't something that like we grew up being taught.
It wasn't taught in our youth group. A lot was being taught.
Yeah.
Multiple times a week as we were involved, but we didn't tackle this issue.
Did they go to the same church?
I was like, I haven't really thought about this. Let me look into this. And again, I'm going to do this multiple times in the story today. I'm going to tell you that I looked into something, and then I'm not going to give you an exhaustive or extensive.
Because they're not talking about
There's a couple
this.
places I'm going to go into that, but here's not one of them because I just don't have time. But long story short.
Too late.
When I looked into this, I basically learned that no matter what scientific discipline you start from, the evidence points overwhelmingly to a world that is very old, billions of years old, to be specific. And basically, the world doesn't really make sense unless it's ancient. I mean, there's so many things about the world that don't make sense. Now, just a couple of helpful books that were helpful for me. There's lots of places you can see all this stuff, but these are both from a Christian perspective. First one was Creation and Time by Hugh Ross, which kind of takes a little bit more look at the astronomical aspect of this. And then another one that gets more into geology is The Bible, Rocks, and Time, which is an incredible resource that if you're interested in this, I suggest that you read.
So I'll just pause that for 1 second. Just to say, for me, at least for right now, where I'm at in trying to understand his story and where he's coming from, I think those are all valid, really valid questions, especially when you're hearing things from secular or just the world, like scientific things like that. I would just say that does not have any bearing on Jesus and salvation.
Right.
I understand it has bearing on how you interpret Genesis and how you can interpret the world in that sense, but the two reasons that I think that Noah's flood, which he referenced, I'll just say Noah's flood as just the first thing, is because Jesus mentions Noah's flood and as a historical event. And 2 Peter mentions Noah's flood as the whole world being dissolved, underwater. So those things, more than just an interpretation of the Hebrew in Genesis, those things, if you believe that Jesus rose from the dead, prophesied his own death and resurrection, and then did that, and then he is not a false prophet and he is not a false teacher. He is a true, like people say he was a great teacher, right? But maybe wasn't God, let's say. Well, if he's a good moral teacher, that means he's not lying. Otherwise, he's not a good moral teacher, is he? So if he is telling the truth about Noah's flood, then that means that all the stuff back in Genesis about Noah's flood was true. If he rose from the dead, and I mean, that seems very reasonable to me. So, but I don't think that has a bearing on whether or not Jesus rose from the dead necessarily, which is the core of Christianity.
Sure.
And then also in terms of the age of the earth, I think that's even less important of an issue in regards to salvation and all of those things, because somebody like Hugh Ross is a solid believer, from as far as we can tell, and even though he believes in the old earth, there are certain things in there in that that discussion that would be more or less important. So, for instance, Hugh Ross would believe in an old universe, billions of years, but not necessarily an old for humans,
right?
Or humans,
old humanity, yeah.
Not the evolutionary aspect of humans from apes kind of thing. Now, from my study of that, it seems very clear that the most unclear theory from both a scientific, geologistic, that's you can see I'm really spreading my wealth of knowledge there, and just the way that the world works, the least credible thing of that is molecules to man evolution. non-Christian scientific world, I do not believe that there is as much evidence for that as people make that seem. You want to talk about old Earth in terms of the planets and
there's arguments that are viable on each side
for the old Earth,
the old Earth or the young Earth.
But somebody like a Hugh Ross or a William Lane Craig, one of the foremost Christian apologists, who are both old Earth, that they believe the Earth or the universe is
old universe,
is billions of years old, are still faithful believers in the gospel and in Jesus,
sure.
And also in that God made humans differently than he made animals. And those two things are mutually exclusive. So you can have a faith in the risen Jesus and believe in an old Earth still, or old universe, let's say, or old Earth, I think. But the less credible belief is the evolution of molecules to man, or apes to humans,
inanimate
kind of thing.
Objects to
Right.
life.
Right.
Yeah.
That I don't think that even from a secular perspective you can say, oh, it's just so clear, kind of a thing. So I hope that is a good point.
Yeah, and I
hope
think
that makes sense.
I think he's building a case for the veracity of Scripture, and that's where he's starting with this. And that these are questions that are building his reasoning for why, if this isn't accurate and true, then, well, how do I believe the rest of the Bible? Mm-hmm. And then it becomes, where, he says that he studied a lot of different things. He'll talk about it, Josh McDowell, stuff, which is all really great stuff if you're talking about canon and trying to understand that. And but then he,
I hope we'll get into
he goes
the
to
canon,
Bart
Ehrman.
Ehrman,
okay, yeah,
to refute Josh McDowell's stuff, and you're going, that's a reaction. That's like, well, now you take what he says and now test that, because it's not good, And James White does, I think, debates Bart Ehrman. Yeah. So look at, you have to go back and forth. If you have a question, don't be like, well, I have a question. This doesn't make sense to me. Thinking from a Christian perspective, oh, this guy, he doesn't believe that. He's refuting that. Mm-hmm. I'll believe him. It's like, well, okay, give him a listen. But then weigh that too. Right. Treat that the same way you're treating this. Yeah.
Yeah, I hope we'll get into, I'm sure you will, some specifics. Maybe. Some specific things.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
Okay. Yeah, because I've never seen this actually, so it'll be good. I was figuring out which one to watch, because there's like every year he would post something else, and I'm like, I don't know which one we're gonna do.
Sure.
So, all right. Good.
Let's go. Yeah.
But basically, this was learning that there was all this evidence that kind of pointed pretty clearly to the earth being old, and then realizing that there was a really large contingent of Christians who just denied that and didn't believe that. It was alarming. It was alarming for a couple of reasons. I mean, first of all, maintaining that young earth view, it requires sort of dismissing or reinterpreting a lot of evidence that has been gathered, right? And you got this big umbrella of Christianity, and the whole idea is that we've got the truth. The whole point is we have the ultimate truth, right? As Christians, God has revealed the ultimate truth to us. This is what I believed. But yet, within that camp, there are these two wildly different perspectives on basically the entire natural world.
Just real quick.
Yeah.
Okay. There's stuff in the Bible that even the Reformation, who was like the Bible inerrancy, right, was like, they're not everything in the Bible is alike clear. It's not all the same amount of clearness.
Right.
So you have to have, what I did for the youth group a couple years back, is the donut with a munchkin in the middle. Okay. In the middle of the donut. What's on the outside of the donut? Okay. Age of the earth is out there. Important, definitely. But it's not the core section of Christianity. Now, I know what he's trying to say. If you start ripping apart the donut, eventually you get to the middle, right? But that's not necessarily the case, is it?
It's not necessarily.
And when you get to what is true in Scripture, Scripture makes clear what is the most important things to believe. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 15, I received from the Lord that which I handed on to you, according to the Scriptures. Christ was dead, buried. We saw him with our own eyes, John says in 1 John. Those are the things. That's the middle. That's the core. And then this stuff on the outside, really smart Christians disagree on it, one way or the other. Yeah, but they don't disagree that Jesus rose from the dead and that he died on the cross. That's the center thing. On the outside, we just did 2 weeks of eschatology. That's like outside. Oh, look, really smart people disagree on it.
Right.
Yeah, and that's okay. We can disagree on it. Even me and Jamie sometimes can disagree on something like that. That's on the outside, called the adiaphora.
Even us.
Yes, on the peripheral of the faith. You're free to disagree with that.
Wrong. It's on the outside. Yeah.
I'm trying to make a point, and all I can get is. Okay. But I think that's what my point is. Yeah. What's the munchkin?
Yes.
That's what we need to hold to, and the most delicious part, anyway.
And I was like,
t-shirt.
Something about this is alarming because this isn't as clean as I thought it was.
And that part does not need to be cleaned.
So I was unsettled, but I was still a Christian. I mean, the core of my Christian belief was still very much intact. Still believe that the Bible was completely true, and I believe that there was a pretty easy way to reconcile this old earth view, they call it, with a literal interpretation of Genesis and the Bible. And of course, I still knew that evolution wasn't true.
Amen.
I knew evolution hadn't happened, right? Because what I knew is that Adam and Eve had to be real. Adam and Eve had to be real because so much comes from them being real. That's the fall that's where the fall happens.
Jesus
the fall
says
is the reason that we have original sin.
That's what
original sin is why we need a savior. It was like, you can't get rid of that story. Plus, Genesis presents all this stuff straight from Adam and Eve, and you go through all the generations. Even the Gospel of Luke, the genealogy of Jesus, features Adam. So if you don't believe in Adam and Eve, like where do you start believing it, right? So I knew that wasn't. I couldn't let go of that.
There was definitely there's a pervading thought that I had that evolution is just something you stay away from. And if you don't want to get into it, don't get into it. Just it's a problem. So don't, and it's not right. So don't worry about it.
Not even beyond that.
No, you can look into it.
I thought evolution just didn't make sense on its face. Amen. It seemed completely illogical. In fact, it seemed desperate.
If you did start to think about it.
It seemed like it's so non-intuitive it was so non-intuitive to me at the time that it just felt like a desperate attempt for someone who didn't believe in God to try to explain the wonderful creation that we had. You got to have something. Well, if God didn't do it, you got to come up with some rant. You got to come up with something. And evolution was the best thing that they had to offer. And that was it for me. And of course, I had read all the books.
I'm scared because I agree with exactly what he's saying, but I know he doesn't end up there.
I would sit down and I would argue with people and convince people who believed in evolution that evolution didn't happen. I loved doing that. You know what I'm saying? I can make people doubt that pretty easily.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting.
Of course,
it's so clear
I never looked at the evidence.
that you can make people doubt it very
I
easily.
had read books about it written by people who didn't believe in it. That's what I had done, and I could roll those arguments out with the best of them. Then in 2006, I read a book called The Language of God by Francis Collins.
Oh, this guy.
Now, Francis Collins is currently the head of the National Institutes of Health.
Christian geneticist.
He's a geneticist who headed up the Human Genome Project when they mapped the human genome there at the end of the 90s. The subtitle of the book is A Scientist Presents Evidence for Belief. This is the kind of thing that I lived for. I loved it when someone who was a scientific mind, who was respected by the world, would come out and basically do this. Make it reasonable to be a Christian. To show you that your faith was reasonable and smart people believe this. I ate this stuff up.
Interesting.
So I got into this book.
It seems necessary validation from outside stuff.
Well, yeah, it's also interesting that he's talking about make it reasonable to be a Christian when he means make it reasonable to believe in the science, which in my opinion, is, again, mutually exclusive from Christianity.
Oh, yeah.
I know that there are some facets that they,
Sure.
intersect, but for the most part, you can believe in an old earth and believe in Jesus still, So it was just interesting that he brought it up, like, to be a Christian, but he's not talking about being a Christian. He's talking about science,
Sure.
and he's still in that field, which the supernatural kind of supersedes science in that sense too. So if you're going like make resurrection from the dead, make that make sense from a rational or a physical, material point of view.
Sure.
It's like, no, that's the whole reason that it's supernatural. But that doesn't mean that didn't happen.
Right.
Just because even if we can't explain it, exactly how it happened.
Well,
God making something out of nothing.
And what he's going to get into with Francis Collins, he's going to be talking about chromosomes and how we're related to other primates, monkeys, and things like that. And he's using that as an argument for evolution. Now, Francis Collins, Darwinian evolution, is arguing for that. Now, as a Christian, and that's theistic evolution. So
he's not in the same camp that he would be in now then, because he's still a Christian, this guy.
As far as I know.
Okay.
I mean, Francis Collins has really kind of gone off quite a bit.
Okay.
When it comes to using aborted embryos, like for scientific research. And not
there's
just,
definitely some inconsistencies.
Yeah,
there.
so it's a little bit of an issue.
But for our talk today, he would still believe in the core tenets of Christianity, as far as you can tell.
As far as I know, yeah.
Okay.
And but the theistic evolution thing, you still have to come to when was man created in God's image? Like at what point was that?
Yeah.
Right. That becomes an issue.
Right.
And then also, where Rhett's going to go with this.
Spoiler alert.
Yeah, a little spoiler alert. And that it's like you can buy into the idea that there is these the genetic transformation throughout time, but you can't come to a place where nothing can create itself. So if you're truly honest, you have to get to the beginning of that and go, what put the information in the DNA?
Yeah.
Where did life come from?
Right.
And there is no answer for that.
Right.
Outside of a transcendent being who creates it.
Artificial, intelligent design.
Yeah, intelligent design. So if you're honest, that's where you go.
Yeah.
If you want to deny the existence of God, then you just don't deal with that. Richard Dawkins, when he was interviewed by Ben Stein, yes, it
Love
was
that
wonderful. But he was interviewed by him, and Ben Stein was asking him just that simple question. Well, where did life originate from? You believe that this happened, but where did it come from? He's like, well, it came on the back of crystals from outer space. He's like, yeah, but where did that come from?
Right.
And he just, Dawkins had no answer, so he just got angry because he's like, I already told you. And it's like, well, you really didn't tell me.
Right.
Because you're not giving me a beginning.
You just put the line in the sand one step back. But
and so you really have to deal with that.
Yeah.
Where did life come from?
Right. Yeah.
And the smartest minds, Stephen Hawking, tried to make a case for existence from nothing, which is asinine on its face.
Yeah.
Nothing really means nothing. The problem with nothing, the word nothing,
Right.
is that you see something when you say nothing.
It's more nothing than the word nothing.
It's absolute nothing.
Yeah.
There's nothing.
Right. Yeah.
Where does that come from?
That's what when Dawkins in one interview with somebody, and he said, I do believe that something came from nothing, and then everybody
laughs,
and he's like, why are you laughing? It's like, well, because it's ridiculous, So Yeah, and that is one of those things where it's like, I understand all the questions. I understand the, the arguments for even the theistic evolution.
Sure.
But the theistic evolution still has a belief in God, because there still had to be something that at least started the process that can explain that. And if you don't want to say, oh yeah, well, it's just God because we can't really understand him or something like that, it at least had to be something somewhere.
Sure.
Because we're here. And if you're saying that at some point nothing was here, then something had to start that process, That's just being rational and logical. That's being logical,
Yeah.
So, but we'll see where he goes.
Dove right in.
I'm going to get a drink too.
Now, pretty early in the book,
Mine's empty.
Collins starts talking about the undeniable evidence for evolution. Evidence that humans evolved from a common ancestor with apes.
Dude, that's pretty nuanced in evolution.
Hold up, y'all. What? Because
that's
guy's a Christian?
That's a big word, evolution, too. There's more than one kind of evolution,
And, of course, because he's a geneticist, he's focusing on DNA and sort of the molecular evidence for this. So one thing that he talked about was sort of earth-shaking to me.
All right, here we go.
And this is going to get technical, so please hold on.
Yeah. Chromosomes, alleles.
And that is this idea that the second chromosome in people is a fused chromosome. So the second chromosome is fused. According to evolutionary theory, we're closely related to great apes, and most closely related to the chimpanzee. Now, all great apes have 24 pairs of chromosomes, right? But we, if you've ever been to 23andMe, you know this, we have 23 pairs of chromosomes.
Get out of here.
Now, chromosome fusion, where literally like a pair of chromosomes fuses directly on top of another pair of chromosomes, is not totally uncommon. It happens at about 1 in 1,000 births, right? It can result in some issues sometimes, but it's not always the case. So if apes and humans are closely related, like evolution suggests, then it seems that a common ancestor to both humans and apes had his or her chromosomes fused together. Okay? So, all right, do we see this in the DNA? Like, what do we see in the DNA? Well, in humans, the second chromosome appears to be a fusion of two great ape chromosomes. First, there are two sections of chromosome 2 that correspond directly to two separate chromosomes in apes. Let me give an analogy if you're having trouble following this. DNA is basically an instruction manual on how to build something, how to build an organism, right? So let's just simplify this and just say that this book is 24 pages long. And let's say on page 2 are the instructions on how to make a hand. And on page 3 are the instructions on how to make a foot. And so that's what you see when you look at a chimpanzee. But then when you look at a human, you see that it goes from page 2 to page 4, and there is no page 3. But then you look closely at page 2 and realize that it's page 2 and page 3 glued on top of each other, and you see the instructions for the hand and the instructions for the foot on this long page 2. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
That's a simple explanation or a simple analogy for kind of understanding this.
Which is why our feet and hands are stuck together.
Exactly.
And apes are not.
Again, this is a grossly simplified analogy, but it does help to understand it. Now, but furthermore, there are these things called telomeres at the end of chromosomes, which basically are these like redundant material that basically protects the DNA structure, right? And so think of it like you've got a header and a footer on a page, right? So there's always a header and there's always a footer on a page. And if you were to take two pages and glue them together, in the middle of those two pages, there would be a header and a footer glued together, right? If you take two pages and you glue them on top of each other, like a really long page, a header and footer would be touching each other. Well, we see two telomeres, two vestigial telomeres, directly on top of each other in the middle of the second chromosome, right? So all the evidence is pointing to these things being fused. Now, The reason this rocked my world so much is because I was familiar with the argument that almost 99% of our DNA is the same as chimpanzees. Everybody knows that because the human genome has been mapped.
It's actually not.
But the
okay.
the creationist answer to that is, God is making.
It's overspoken, like it's overstated.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. The you have to define that. What does that really mean? And it doesn't. When you really look into it, it is the difference between us and chimps is incredibly significant. It's not like we think 99%.
Yeah, we think we're just.
It's like, hold on a minute. We need to look into what that 99% means. Mm-hmm. And it's just grossly overstated.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. I was gonna say he's going through that whole thing, and regardless of the science that goes into that or whatever, I'm not discounting that. But as he was recounting what the guy was speaking about it, 'cause this is supposed to be undeniable proof, like for evolution,
which it isn't. But okay.
And then he started with, and it seems like, and then goes from there. And I'm like, that's not undeniable. Then this is making inferences, it's making plausibilities.
Sure.
But it is not like an undeniable. Like an undeniable proof would be like a lot of fossils that show the ape to man fusing.
Sure.
Like, or not even just fossils, or like living beings or something that is evidence of that fusing together of the two species. And like the guy who we watched in the Truth Project a couple of years back, who's not even a Christian, but he's like, we're not just looking for like one missing link. There would be thousands or millions of these fossils.
Link's not missing.
Everywhere. Links, yeah. Nice. This would be so obvious if it was true that humans did come from apes. We wouldn't have to be looking for these like missing link kind of a things. It's like, oh, Lucy, like the Lucy, the ape skull or whatever. It's like, even if that is whatever, that's one thing. Like you're talking about a species going from one to another. You need a whole bunch more evidence to make something obvious. And if there's not that, then it's not obvious.
Sure.
At the very least, you can say, well, it seems this way, or it makes sense, or it's plausible, but
irrefutable
is a big word, and I don't think that it's bearing the weight that he's putting on it.
Well, it's like saying, well, because this looks like this, well, obviously they're related.
Yeah.
It's like, well, no, it's not obvious.
Right. Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
It could be, but so
Yeah.
that's the stuff that it's a little frustrating when science makes those inferences.
Right. Yeah. Okay, ready?
This instruction manual, and you're going to see
26.
that, it's kind of the same, and then it's sort of different in some key ways. Like, that's God's prerogative. Why can't he do that? But that doesn't seem like an adequate explanation to why it definitely feels like and looks like and seems to be very conclusive that we actually have the same chromosomes and they've been fused. That doesn't seem like consistent with the idea that this is just God's prerogative. But that wasn't the only thing. I was so interested in this particular thing, this DNA evidence, because I'd heard about the fossils and all that stuff, but this DNA stuff just seemed, this is like how we decide court cases, right? And this is how we convict people. This is how we can find out if somebody actually committed a crime. This is definitive stuff. Okay. And then I learned about retroviruses. So essentially, there are certain RNA viruses that when you become infected with them, they actually insert a copy of themselves into your DNA. So you can look at your DNA and you can be like, oh, you got that virus at that time. And then occasionally, these viruses, or this sort of retrovirus inside your DNA, will be passed down to your children. And that means it's endogenous. It's in your genes. Well, we actually see that we share these endogenous retroviruses with the organisms that we are closely related to. And the more closely related you are to them, the more retroviruses you have in common. Now, let me again, to take this manual, this instruction manual analogy further. Let's say you look at page 19 of a chimpanzee manual, and you see, halfway down on page 19, there's a coffee stain. Like somebody spilled coffee on the manual. But it looks like a copy of a coffee stain, like somebody there was an original and there was a coffee stain, and this seems like a copy of that, like somebody ran it through a Xerox machine. And then you look at a human instruction manual, and on page 19, you see the same exact copy of the same exact coffee stain in the same exact place.
Why would God do that, you're thinking?
And so then you think, well, it seems to me that the most logical conclusion is that these two manuals come from a common manual, that there's an ancient common ancestor that is the ancestor to both humans and great apes.
What's kind of interesting is I think all believers who don't believe in molecules to man evolution still believe in a type of evolution.
Sure.
Not macroevolution, but what's called microevolution, which is where species and kinds change within their own kind to other species over time. Within their allowance. But the problem comes with, which I think is pretty persuasive, the problem comes when you're talking about, he's talking essentially about how that other information can get into creating like a new species, not just a new within the same kind, but a new species. But the problem is that there is only a loss of information from one kind to another. So that coffee stain is not going to create anything that is more or greater than what it already was. And so when you're trying to get from the first living organism to a greater organism than that, like something with eyes now, which is very, very complex. Well, at some point, from an evolutionary perspective, you had to have something without eyes, and then over time it becomes an eye. But in order to get that information, you have to somehow have more information than what you had before. And no matter what that coffee stain that he's saying would produce, it would only produce less and less information, like the Newton's second law of thermodynamics, that things are constantly degrading over time. So I think that's where the difficulty would come in for me, is where does the greater information come from to create from apes to a rational thinking human who would be on, unless he's saying that we're on the same plane.
I see a couple other issues with it. I don't want to stop you if you have
No, I'm just
a coffee stain is a bad analogy because it's not like a retrovirus isn't just a stamp of something. A retrovirus leaves DNA. So just because humans have this retrovirus DNA, it to suggest that just because apes have the same retrovirus DNA, to say that because of that we're related, it's a bad argument, because it's like couldn't they just infect the apes like they infect the humans and leave the same DNA?
Almost like how animals get sick and
it's
like humans do, but it doesn't mean that. Yeah.
Now, I don't know enough about retroviruses. I have read a little bit on how they believe that information can be added to a genetic code through retroviruses, and that's what he's talking about. So you are adding information to the DNA code. The problem is the information that you're adding. I would be pretty confident isn't going to be information that is useful to the advancement of a species, because it would have to be very precise information to make sight from blindness kind of thing. And even to, if you were to break that down, I think was it David Berlinski
that's who I was talking about.
Yeah, the mathematician.
Yeah.
When he was talking, he's like, the Truth Project? It was the Truth Project.
I know, I just mentioned that whole thing.
I'm not sure if it was the Truth Project or if it was something else I was watching, what he was talking about. Well, I just did a back of the napkin calculation. That was the Truth Project. Yeah. And it would take like 35,000, little changes for you to get from, a creature with lungs to a creature from gills to lungs or something like that. He's like, it's just preposterous mathematically. It can't happen. And so to suggest that retroviruses are carrying information, which I don't know if that's what he was saying. I think he was just using it as an indication that we're related because we have the same markers, retrovirus markers, because it left certain information. It doesn't mean that they weren't infected with like we're infected with retroviruses just like they were, kind of thing.
Would it be like a genetic fallacy where it's like, well, look,
but I don't know enough.
Apes have fingers and humans have fingers, so it must be related, kind of a thing. It's like, that's not how you.
It's not science.
That's not scientific, right? Yeah. When you're trying to discuss DNA and things about new systems of information. That's not a new system. They're both individual. They're not. They don't have to be connected just because they have similar structures.
Right. Similarities do not necessarily suggest relationship. So, but again, I haven't read his book. I'd probably be a good read. But there's a lot of flaws when it comes to evolution. And not the least of which is what we were talking about before.
The origins,
Where's it all come from?
It's always been an issue, even for the most prominent, atheists.
Yep.
If anything, you just say, well, we don't know, in which case it's like, and you're saying that we are not clear enough or not truthful, or anything,
Well, evolution is a religion, it is. It's a religion just like any other religion, is that you have to have faith in something. You believe that there is something that started all of this and built all of what we see and all of that, or if you believe that it's not scientific, you can't test it. The problem I have is that you cannot test it. The longest running test, I have to look it up again. I looked it up probably 10 years ago. It was a E. coli test that was done by I can't remember his name now. Lemke, I think it's Lemke, and he's I believe he's a professor or doctor, maybe a geneticist, but he's at a college, and they've been running this test, changing environments and things like that for these E. coli bacteria, but the E. coli, although there's some really cool changes in it as the environment changes, it's been adapting to the environment. It has never gotten beyond its genetic potential of being E. coli. It will. And this is a 30-year. This is now it's probably 40-year evolutionary test. Experiment.
It was probably like a poster child of look at the evolution because it's adapting.
Right.
But it's always still E. coli adapting.
It never gets past the genetic capability of E. coli. And
the domain that it has, it can't have anything else other than that.
And if you add retroviruses to that and all that stuff, it doesn't change that.
That is still going to be E. coli.
As far as I know, I have to look it up again. But I would encourage you to look up that study. If you're watching, it was I believe his name is Lemke. Look up Lemke E. coli experiment, and it's fascinating. All of the changes are really cool too. But it's fascinating because they're trying to use it as an argument for one family to change to another family. That obviously, because of these small mutations
over time,
well, it has to. It must mean that there were big mutations, and it's like that is not science.
That's an inference that has never been shown to be true, and you can't test it unless you test it for 30, 40 years, within the span of one person's lifetime, which they've been doing, and it has not borne out that truth at all.
And at the time, 10 years ago when I looked at it, or whatever it was they were equating the amount of changes in the E. coli bacteria to 1 million years of human evolution. So it was this is how much. This would be equivalent to a million years of human evolution. And I'm going, if we look back, you follow the evolutionary timetable, 1 million years from Homo sapien is Homo habilis, I think, and that's a different species altogether. So you're like, well, it just doesn't fit. It doesn't work. And so it's like they're using an argument.
It's assumption.
They're using it and
based on
they're using extrapolation.
That's where I was looking
rather than and facts. Conjecture.
Yeah.
Rather than being able to use the scientific method, because you can't use the scientific method.
Yeah.
It's impossible. And that's the problem. Right. When somebody's like, well, it's fact. It's like, it's not. Show me the scientific method. Yeah. Show me how you work this out, because you can't. That's a problem. So it's based on faith, because these minor changes just must mean big changes.
Or just presumption and theory, which it's fine to believe, but don't tell me that it's obvious.
But it's a hypothesis, or a hypothesis at that point,
Right.
And you can never get past the hypothesis.
Right. Yeah.
So
that's where I have trouble with it's obvious, or what did the guy say? Not Rhett, but what he was talking about, the undeniable proof of evolution. It's just not undeniable. Right. It's extrapolation, it's inference.
Well, and the problem is where your starting point is in your belief system is where the evidence
will lead to.
Right. So if I believe that, well, obviously evolution is true, then all of the things that I see, I will fit.
Everything's coming up evolution.
Yeah. And so, and there are smart people. I mean, people who I really appreciate who are like, evolution's just true, and there is no denying it. And it's like, well, really there is. The problem is you've established your foundation on evolution. So everything that you see, whatever comes down the line, you attribute to evolution, right? And you make it fit. So, and that's a problem.
Well, and you have to have nuance too. You have to, because otherwise, if you are in that like fundamentalist bubble where it's like young Earth and it's like you're like you can get run over by like really powerful, smart arguments that people will have, because there is such a thing as microevolution, like the E. coli, like the finches, right? With Darwin's finches.
Right.
And it's not like that. No, we can't. Like that doesn't happen. Kind of a thing. It's like it does happen, and it's makes it such a stronger case when you bring up to somebody like a Rhett or a Link, of like, we actually do believe in a type of evolution. And so these things that we actually can test over time, and we can see the small changes within a species adapting to their environment, is true.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean that therefore that it comes from, you don't, like the baby with the bathwater kind of a thing, And I would also just say, still, that person who does believe in theistic evolution, who wrote that book with the chromosomes and all that stuff, still believes in the essentials of the faith.
Right.
And so it does not necessitate you continually deconstructing the core tenets of the faith still. Right. And we still haven't gotten to those arguments, obviously, but this is still a separate issue from the gospel itself. So I just want to keep that in mind too.
Two small pieces of DNA evidence, and I'm not going to go into any more details, but let me just say that the main thing that this did for me is I had been told a lot of things about evolution. I had been told things growing up. And now I was questioning those things because I had been told that there's no real evidence. This is a desperate attempt to try to come up with some harebrained theory to just explain things.
Told about the
and I'm like, but this DNA stuff is pretty freaking conclusive. I can't imagine another way to... Now, I'm not saying there aren't explanations for this. I'm not saying you can't go to a creationist website and find that it's not like they don't know about this. Yeah. They have an answer. I've read the answer. I find the answer to not be compelling in the least. But let me just say, this made me just question, like, all this stuff, you've been told all this stuff, like...
Yeah, put a bug in his ear.
There were no transitional fossils. There were no transitional forms. There's no transitional between this animal and this animal.
Define it.
Right.
There's a lot of them. There's a lot of very convincing ones. I've been told that there were really no vestigial structures, that there's nothing on your body or an animal's body that's like a sign of something that's no longer
That's actually
being
like
used.
a silly.
There's
Yeah.
always a use for it. We keep
Even I
finding
know
those.
that there are vestigial
Turns out
structures
there's
on that.
lots of examples of vestigial structures. In fact, there's many structures that there's no other way to properly understand them other than them being vestigial, meaning that they're from the past, they're no longer in use. Essentially, every criticism of evolution that I had held on to justify my unwillingness to believe in it
I guess we
turned
don't
out
have to,
be
like,
a
stop and explain
misconception or a
everything, right?
misrepresentation of the facts. And so, after reading a bunch of books,
Or we'll never get
talking
done.
to a lot of people,
I want to get to the gospel
listen,
stuff.
I didn't want to believe this. I'd spent my whole life not
He
believing
was like,
this,
"You're
and
gonna
not
have to
wanting
wait."
to believe this. But I kind of was just faced with this, that evolution was by far the best explanation for what we actually see in the real world. If you're interested in any further reading on this, there's a really good wiki entry called Chromosome 2, which breaks this down with resources. It's very well referenced. And there's a wiki entry called
It went from
Evidence of
undeniable
Common
and
Descent.
facts to the best possible
That kinda get into
explanation.
this, and I'm going to make some more recs.
That's not the same thing.
But let me just say, I didn't want to believe this. It was incredibly problematic, and there were plenty of Christians very smart Christians, smarter than me, who didn't believe in it, who I could have stayed in that camp.
That's a classic. I didn't want to believe
But
this.
I just, in my heart, I didn't feel like it. I felt like I had to follow the truth. I thought that the truth had to be more important than my commitment to my beliefs. It had to be more important than my ideology.
Mm-hmm.
And I want to say that about, there's these
But
plenty of
truth
Christian
is
apologists and Christian
more
smart Christian
more
people
sure than it just seems like a
who I would
possible
say just
explanation kind of a
creationists
thing.
who
you know?
deny evolution. I don't think that they're being deliberately deceptive. I want to be clear about that. I don't think these people are sitting around there like, oh, we see these
Yeah.
facts and we're going to misrepresent them because we're going to lie about this. I think that they're good people. But I think that they're so committed to their belief system that they have become impervious to pretty straightforward information about this subject. But the thing that did for me
Or
is
they
I had
do
placed
have
a
other
lot
evidence.
of faith,
Or-
You know,
Yeah.
not just in God, but in these people who helped me understand why I believed what I believed from an intellectual standpoint, right? I had a very real, emotional, personal, spiritual relationship with God that I was practicing. But there was this intellectual foundation
nothing.
that I would, whenever I had a doubt, I would kind of retreat to this intellectual foundation. And all of a sudden, those people I'd been trusting in, I began to doubt
Missed it
that I
by
had been shown
that
the truth
much.
and told the truth about
Very
other things, right?
I have a relationship with somebody who doesn't
Get to this
exist.
answer.
Yes, I really have.
We had conversations all the
had
time.
one.
But I guess my question is, when you came to grips with evolution, was it just, okay, now I'm going to incorporate that into
Here we
my
go.
faith?
Exactly. It was.
Because I know there's people thinking, well, you can understand and accept the process of evolution and still have faith. I mean,
Well, yeah. So, exactly.
you're not an atheist all of a sudden, right?
I was very unsettled, but then I was like, well, hold up. I mean, Francis Collins, the whole point of the book
Yeah.
is that he believes in God because of what he's seen in the DNA. And he's a Christian. He's an evangelical Christian. And he believes in evolution.
He presented it as that was God's creative process was
Involved
Evolution.
this stuff.
Which is more
Not to
rational
mention,
than the
one of the
something
most
from nothing.
respected and revered philosophical Christian minds of all time, C.S. Lewis, was a theistic evolutionist. And so
You have to.
I mean, people, I get on. Oh my goodness, people will accuse Lewis for some reason, but like just people from the past, just
Yeah.
accuse them of the most crazy things.
Yeah, and
that Lewis was very nuanced, and he went back and forth on a couple of issues. You know, I remember somebody was telling me C.S. Lewis didn't believe in hell, like in a literal hell, because of the last battle. When you have, I'm like in the fictional story that he's writing, or that somebody who was serving Tash the false god, but Aslan lets him into
Yes,
heaven.
yes.
So it's like, see, people who are worshiping Allah, God can still let into heaven, kind of thing. That's what Lewis believed, you know. And it's like, that does not mean that that's what Lewis believed. That means he was writing a fictional story,
Yeah.
and he wanted to put that in it.
Yeah.
Same thing with like the atonement with the stone table and stuff like that. He believed that. It's like, why don't you go to his other theological writings, not a fantasy story?
Right.
A. B. Why don't you go to like the Bible or something that's actually theological in nature when you're talking about your theology, instead of going to a person who, yes, many Christians do look up to him as a spiritual leader, but in no way do we put him on that pedestal to be like.
And the information that Lewis had at the time in the 40s.
He didn't believe in hell, and he believed in evolution. Who knew this?
The stuff that was being taught at that time, like there wasn't a lot there on when it came to creation science or to intelligent design. There was,
I guarantee you, he believed that God created the world.
Yes, exactly. God created it, and then he might have been like, well, that's an interesting point of view.
If we're talking about our side and Rhett and Link's side right now, C.S. Lewis is on our side.
Yeah, you better believe it.
And I was reading C.S. Lewis on hell because it's like he has a thing, because I'm like, wait, C.S. Lewis didn't believe in hell because somebody was saying that. I'm like, let me read about it. And his whole thing is like, man, I wish hell was not real. Yeah. Because I know a lot of people who are going to be there, but I cannot deny the truth that the Bible speaks of. And the truth is the truth, whether I want to believe it or not. Yeah. And so that's why I do everything I can to keep people out of hell. Yeah. And I'm like, that's what Lewis actually is saying I believe about hell. Don't go to Narnia and tell me what he believed,
Right.
So
that's the only book they've ever read.
Right, exactly.
That's
exactly.
The problem.
So, I mean, check your sources and please leave a comment if you can find something that says Lewis believed in evolution, like Rhett believes in evolution, or even theistic evolution. I would be more than happy to read that, but I highly doubt that is the case.
Sure.
So,
he believed animals could talk, Joel. Obviously.
Thank you. He believed in witches and fawns. The children's. You mean the children's author?
Knew I was in good company.
And the bus takes you to heaven.
This doesn't mean I'm not a Christian. This just means that I'm a little disappointed in the way that this subject has been misrepresented by so many Christians.
By that much.
But again, my goal was let's stick with the truth. All truth is God's truth. I'm not going to be scared of the truth. God's in control. He's the one who's established this entire universe. I shouldn't be afraid to poke and pry to any of this stuff, right?
Absolutely.
So that was when I kind of got into this world of theistic evolutionists, Christians. There's a good book that I read called Coming to Peace with Science, Bridging the Worlds of Faith and Biology. A guy who believes in evolution but is a Christian. That was a helpful book for me. And then I got really involved, I wasn't involved, but I spent a lot of time at the website Biologos, which is essentially a group of Christian scientists, and there's a bunch of articles there. It's still active. I haven't been there in a long time, but I checked recently. It's still there. They're still doing a lot of things.
Stephen Meyer, David Berlinski, Michael Behe, those guys from the intelligent design camp.
Right.
It would have been good for him to look at that also and say, wow, that's, there's a lot of things here that are actually answering that.
Right.
And asking questions that aren't being asked in the other areas. Yeah. And coming from, a place where they're not putting their, like Dave Berlinski, he's not a Christian. He's just like, as a mathematician.
Right? Oh, yeah.
Evolution's ridiculous.
Yeah.
So he's just coming
that kind of evolution.
And then Michael Behe, who's presenting some other, other points of view when it comes to irreducible complexity. And just throwing, just looking at things.
All the sides.
Sure. Yeah. And the problem, one of the issues with this evolutionist mindset is that they're not willing to look at anything else. Like they call this Intelligent Design Institute like pseudoscience. Mm-hmm. It's like, no, this is actually what science is supposed to be. Mm-hmm. It's like you didn't figure everything out, and if you think you have, then you're not a scientist. Mm-hmm. A true scientist believes that this could change. Right. I may not have all the answers. Right. So you should be able to look at them and say,
Follow,
well, those are interesting
follow
points
the
of view.
science, right?
Yeah, let's test it out. Let's
Yeah.
sit down together. Let's work this out.
Yeah.
But it shows the bias. It shows that if anybody disagrees with that religion, then they're wrong. It's the same thing. It's a religion. That's what it is, you know. And so
I'm thankful that Rhett doesn't seem to have any like ill will towards like believers or stuff like that. But I do think the camp that he was in the evangelical like situation that he was in, I don't know if it had quite the depth that is necessary to fill the nuances that he's looking for in the science and stuff. I think someone like Hugh Ross probably would have at least like more of a nuance like that. But even the people that you're talking about, because I know a lot of people who, myself included actually, that when I hear somebody who's like that fundamentalist camp of just like, you know, this is what it is, we can't go, you know, it's like that doesn't even appeal to me anymore because it's not willing to look at all of the other sides.
right.
And that's what we always try to do. That's why we're doing stuff like this too, like to understand where people are coming from. I'm thinking of the verse that says, you know, the man who speaks first thinks that he's right until somebody comes and cross-examines him or is
right,
able to challenge that. And so I think he's in that first camp. I thought I was right until somebody came and cross-examined it, which is now he's thinking that that's the evolutionary side. The problem is I think he needed the next step up of the first camp that is able to equally challenge that. And then it might, because I think we've all been on kind of rabbit trails, even like YouTube rabbit trails you get on where you're just like, how did I get here to this? Like, now I'm into like ancient scrolls of, you know, whatever. And you can start kind of like going on that train of thought and then being like, oh no, like is everything I believed was a lie kind of a thing. It's like, just take a step back and understand that our minds are crazy things and they will tend to keep going one way unless there's something else to kind of halt that. But just to be like open to seeing both sides. So I know I said that a lot,
I think that's true.
Yeah.
For me. And then I got really involved, I wasn't involved, but I spent a lot of time at the website BioLogos.
Oh, sorry.
Which is essentially a group of Christian scientists, and there's a bunch of articles there.
Whoa,
It's still
Christian
active.
Science
I've
now?
been here a long time, but I checked recently. It's still there.
When you realize you are the cult.
But things get pretty complicated at this point. Like once I started looking into this, so I'm going to give you the short version, if you can believe that this is the short version. But basically, what you run into is that there's sort of two camps within people who sort of accept evolution. One camp believes that Adam and Eve are still real, and that they are either a special creation or they're sort of the result of the process, but they're actually real historical people because they need to be real and historical in order for the fall and then the gospel.
No, because they are real historical people,
Gotta be
not
honest,
because they need to be. You know?
I did not find all of those arguments felt really tenuous and just felt like you guys are, you know, that you have to have Adam and Eve, and so you're sort of inserting them in a way that they're not really fitting as a little, you know, square peg round hole situation.
I remember the Tim Keller book Reason for God. I remember discussing that at that time, and that being, as I remember it, his
Southern
position.
Baptist.
Yeah, and this is problematic though because I was like, I just don't think there's a way that Adam and Eve were real as presented in the Bible. But like I said earlier, you know, they're presented in the genealogy of Jesus in the book of Luke. So, what's the deal, y'all? You know what I'm saying? This was problem.
I just don't like the language of because they needed them to be real and stuff. That's not the point of it. The point is that not only does the Bible say it's real and Jesus say that they're real, but that the people who are on that side believe that they were real. Not that they just kind of have to be, but I know that doesn't really make sense kind of thing. Maybe he's talking about the theistic evolutionists because it doesn't make sense in their worldview for them to be real. I could see that, but just talking from a, you know, conservative Christian perspective, I don't like that kind of language because it seems like there's an ulterior motive to it, you know. Well, we just need that to be, you know. It's like, no, we actually
force that in.
We actually believe that they were real for many reasons, but not the least of which that Jesus Jesus said that they were real, you know.
Well, give me give me a reason that they're not.
Yeah.
You know.
So maybe you will.
This is a problem. But what this did, again, I just felt like this doubt was kind of creeping beyond the point of creation, and it was creeping into the Old Testament itself, because that's the way the story goes. You got Adam and Eve, and then you got a story
Andy
that
Stanley.
begins with them and moves all the way down to Abraham and Moses and then David. You know, you got it's all part of a system.
By a whole testament.
So again, I had been told, there was something I'd been told about the Old Testament, and that was the Old Testament is always supported by archaeological evidence.
And the other person.
I'd heard that from so many Christians. It's like, sometimes they see something in the Bible and they're like, well, there's no evidence for that, and then they dig a little bit deeper and they're like, oh, we found the evidence. Or they find basically the idea that the Bible is always vindicated because the Bible is completely true in everything that it touches upon. But when I really looked into it, I started realizing that that's not true. That's not really the case. Just a few things. I'm touching on some quick things. Why is there no Egyptian historical record of the Israelites' captivity?
Yeah, but
2 million people.
You can't
they
argue
kept great records.
a negative.
Why are they not? Why is there no record of?
Like it's an argument from silence.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, how about you argue the things that they have found that have proven the veracity of the Scripture, rather than the things that you think are important? That, well, I mean, they didn't find this, so therefore, all the things that they did find that show that the Scripture's accurate, well, they don't mean anything.
Yeah,
it's like a silly argument. But
well, I feel like a lot of things in history that people believe that would have the same issue of like, well, we don't have evidence for who built the pyramids, right, or whatever. Yeah. But it's like, well, but we have evidence of pyramids, I guess.
It really is. It's a bad argument.
Yeah.
Why is there no archaeological evidence of the Exodus? Basically, this massive group of people wandering in the wilderness for 40 years. They've looked for over 100 years. They've looked. No evidence.
I think there has been evidence, actually.
Yeah. Well, what evidence are you looking for?
Yeah.
Too? They had temporary shelters.
I think there's evidence of ancient chariot wheels like degrading in the Red Sea. I think they found. I watched a video a little while ago on it. None of that like needs to be like, it's not like that's what our faith is in, but it's like, if you're looking for evidence, like that wasn't like, oh, I need there to be this evidence kind of a thing. But if you do need that, then go search for it. I'm pretty sure it's there, for the very things that he's talking about,
Yeah. Where are you looking for this evidence?
Right.
Why does the modern archaeological evidence call Joshua's conquest of Canaan into question? Why is there good reason to believe that the Israelites arose not out of conquest or force, but by simply branching off of the Canaanites? And those are just a few things. But there were some pretty major events that all of a sudden, I was like, no, this isn't well supported. This isn't outside of the Bible. These things are not well supported. I was even further troubled, right? And so I'm losing my faith in the Old Testament, but
another problem is I'm almost positive he's not like reading Scripture and coming to those conclusions. Yeah. He's reading other people who are bringing up these things, and then he's like, oh, well, yeah, where are those? I don't know where all of the evidence is. So then, but it's like, how much did you look for it?
Well, I think his trajectory is already established.
Yeah.
And so everything is feeding into that.
Right.
Like we were.
That's what I was saying. Like the YouTube train of thought.
Yeah.
So it's keep going down that rabbit hole.
Just keep going.
Yeah. Yeah, it's true. Unfortunately.
Just the wrong direction.
Right. Yeah.
Also, losing my faith in those same Christian thinkers who have said all this stuff that, like, guys, you this is solid as a rock. You can stake your entire life on these truths, and you
can stake your entire life on evidence of the Israelites in Egypt. Hopefully that's not what you were taught, because I haven't even seen that ever, and I still have faith in it, or in faith in Christianity. Sure. So that's definitely not where our faith lies.
Well, what about all the writings have value too,
right? Right.
Like,
yeah, and also like how many other things in history do we believe because of writings of them, without the evidence for them?
Exactly.
In history,
like Atlantis.
Yeah. The Titanic.
Oh, those poor. No, never mind.
Always be vindicated. So I was in crisis at this point, but here's what I said. I said, does this Old Testament stuff really matter? Like, is this really what this is all about?
Paging Andy Stanley.
Isn't the important thing Jesus, right? If this is about a relationship with Jesus, does this Old Testament stuff? First of all,
Andy Stanley.
This is why Andy Stanley is doing what he's doing, though.
But you
because
can't really make an argument
questions.
from. Isn't the important thing Jesus, right?
Amen.
If this is about a relationship with Jesus, does this Old Testament stuff?
Boy, that
first
gets
of all,
thrown around a
okay,
lot,
maybe
huh?
there's no archaeological evidence for this stuff. Maybe there's no historical evidence of.
my
But you
personal
can't really
See,
make.
I'm sorry. I don't want to keep stopping it. The relationship with Jesus, obviously important, but that to me screams of the summer camp Christian Southern Baptist come up and invite Jesus into your heart, kind of a relationship kind of thing, and then you can go and talk with him, kind of a thing. And I don't think that is the depth of the relationship that the Bible speaks about with you and Jesus. A. B. When we say it's not a religion, it's a relationship thing. That's not true at all. It's a religion and it's a relationship, and a religion should be based on something that is factual or something that can be tested. And so, whether or not you have even a relationship with Jesus, the history, I think the history bears out the story of Jesus and the crucifixion. Even Bart Ehrman believes that there was a man named Jesus who was crucified.
Yeah.
So there is reliability to the story of Jesus, which I think does need to be separated from the relationship with Jesus as a alive being right now.
Right.
They can be separated. But just that I have a relationship with Jesus, it screams of like mushy gushy, like wait, and
Sure.
it's not really where our faith, yes, in the relationship, of course, but also in this actually happened.
Right.
You know.
Right.
Argument from nothing. It's like just the absence of evidence is not necessarily an argument against something. So these things could have happened. We just haven't found them. We haven't found them yet, but we can still have faith and believe them. And plus, like I said, isn't this
That's
just
what you
about
were
Jesus?
saying.
Now, let me be clear. I was still living in North Carolina at the time.
See?
I was still leading a small group Bible study at my church that I had been leading for many years. And I still consider myself a Christian. And I was slowly letting people that I loved, including my wife, in on some of this stuff. And every time I would bring up a piece of it, she would just start crying.
And just superimpose that on last week's conversation in terms of timing from graduation to being an engineer to being on staff with crew.
So where I'm at right now with this whole like losing faith in the Old Testament and the archaeological evidence, we're probably talking about like 09, 10 at that point. So right as we're kind of wrapping up, we had left staff by this point. But the early stuff about evolution, that was 06, right? So that was the year that we left staff. And then the few years before that, I was where I kind of spent most of my time just thinking about like the old Earth, younger stuff. I've spent a few years.
I wonder why he's
like
interested in the
in
timing of his. Maybe it's because he's his friend.
Again,
So at least not being on staff, there is a little bit of a pressure release to be able to at least start to broach these conversations with Jesse.
When you're in full-time ministry, you have absolutely no impetus to actually explore these things because that's your well-being, that's your livelihood. Why are you going to threaten that? You don't want to consider these things because you don't want to be like, if I actually consider this, am I going to end up having to not be a preacher anymore? Am I going to have to drop out?
I've heard that one a lot too.
Am I going to stop being a missionary?
Yeah,
don't know.
or for
I don't
us.
think
And
like
you
that.
set aside
our-
so much stuff for that.
It was your full-time job.
I'm like, let's
and
go.
it
Dig in.
was,
Yeah.
as we've talked about, we were so fully engaged and committed to working within those parameters to pursue our dreams, even not fully understanding that that's what we were doing.
Yeah.
We had left staff. We were making it on our own. You're still very much involved in the church. You're teaching people. You're having these conversations.
What do you think about him being in church and in leadership with these kind of doubts and stuff? Well, we tend to bring people into leadership at the slightest whim because they seem to be like awake and alive, and with a mouth that's moving. Yeah.
So it's like, oh, you want to serve?
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah.
Perfect.
But it does seem like maybe there's like a grounding issue with his faith where the questions I think are okay to ask, but I feel like what he did was have these really deep questions and then back off of being in ministry and not confronting the people that a leader should confront, and instead kind of working it over in his own mind.
Or maybe a lack of accountability, lack of structure that would, would work well for kind of dealing with those kind of questions.
Yeah. I don't know. It's just, it's weird to, because I think he's just going home and then having these questions, but not like dealing with them with people who could answer them for him, Yeah. If you're just up in your own mind, like you'll believe anything in like a week. Yeah. Like I know for myself, like that you get on these.
Yeah, like Bigfoot.
Yeah.
Aliens.
Ghosts, the whole thing.
Let's go, man.
Conversations with Jessie, and you get into a little bit of it and she breaks down.
Every time. This was traumatic for her. Every time I would bring it up. And of course, I would wait until it had become unbearable for me, and then I would bring it up to her. Because I'm trying to respect her, and it's like we're raising these kids, and I know how important this stuff is for her.
If he's divorced now.
And she was very educated in all this, too,
Good for them.
We would argue about the young earth thing when we were dating in college.
Yeah, see?
Because that was her perspective, her background. And it was not easy for our marriage. And
yeah, because you don't want to bring it up early because it's a tough thing it may pass. It's a tough thing to bring up. So it sounds like you start to bring it up when you, like you said, you can't.
When I got
not bring it up, and then it's almost you've reached a conclusion about something, and then you're spilling your guts to her and expecting her to. She's late to the process. Which is actually even more difficult.
Yeah. And you mentioned that thing about like the concern was with truth, and I don't know where this comes from. This is my disposition. My dad was a lawyer and is a law professor. He's got a very specific way of kind of getting to the bottom of things, and I think so. It's kind of in my DNA to be concerned about truth, but I think ultimately it was like again back to what I said at the beginning is the whole point is that Jesus is the way, the truth, and the life. This is the truth. You find the truth sets you free.
Munchkins.
Truth.
Munchkin
the whole
truth.
point of the Bible, why people defend the Bible and say that the Bible is
still on the outside,
without error. It is from God. It's written by God through people.
I mean, also biblical inerrancy is another thing you have to define and the nuances of that. And people don't do that, and they just assume that it just means, well, it's true about everything. What do you mean by that? Because all of the copies, some of the copies aren't true.
Sure.
For one thing, some of the, like we have textual variants where it's like, which one is the original?
Right.
That's not what we're talking about when it talks to that. Also, you have people lying in the Bible. Doesn't mean that it's not true. It's still recording the true event that happened, Sure. But and these are just like simple examples. But what do you mean like that the Bible is true? Also, theoretically, it can be still true about those main things, Jesus and all of that, while one thing in Jeremiah, if it was not true, that doesn't necessarily mean that therefore that's not true.
Everything else is.
So yes, we believe in biblical inerrancy, obviously.
Sure.
But if you didn't, you could still be a Christian believing in Christ and just believe that something like Andy Stanley, for instance, is probably in that camp, though I don't know where he is right now. But again, it doesn't touch on the essentials of the faith still, So
point of all that is because it being true is paramount.
Is that a sign for us?
Maybe more so than any other faith.
Right,
the
at that
holy
time,
text
yeah.
being true. is it's a linchpin, right? Now, okay.
You want to stop it?
Just one more thing. You had mentioned there were two camps when you were talking about about the Bible being...
Okay, so we'll kind of push the pause button there.
Yeah.
I'm
tired, man.
It takes so much longer to react to something than to watch something.
Yeah.
So it's an hour and 45-minute video, and we're trying to react to it, which is going to take longer than an hour and 45 minutes. So we're going to have to split this up into two parts again. But really, I like where we're headed with this, because I think there are some good points that he brings up that would be fine to continue digging into. But I do think that he's making very broad statements about the faith that don't follow from the problems that he's having. Because even with evolution, does not mean the core of the faith is touched. Even with biblical inerrancy, it does not, even in the Old Testament, which he brought up specifically, the Old Testament, it still does not. And I think that's because in the New Testament, there is a lot more geological and historical evidence, because it's more recent.
Sure.
And it's also a more time when people were writing stuff down, like Josephus and other people. Like that's There's just more history for that New Testament. But if there's something in the Old Testament that doesn't turn out to be true, it still doesn't necessarily mean that the stuff about Jesus isn't true either, even though of course we would believe that it's all true. And what's the nuance of all of that? Like, what are those really important details that people don't seem to bring up, and they just assume that they know what those words mean with biblical inerrancy and stuff like that? Read the Chicago Statement on biblical inerrancy. That's what the Christian scholar evangelical community believes about biblical inerrancy. And you'll probably read some of those things and be like, wow, I didn't even know that that's right. But those are the things that are so important. Yeah. So we'll leave that link below also, so that you know what we believe when we say biblical inerrancy, because it might not be what you thought that we believe by it. And I think that's an important thing for people who are in this part of deconstructing, when they get this one little thing that can turn off like the red flag alarm in their head, to be like, oh, wait. Now that I'm reading this, I realize that that's not even what I should have believed before.
Sure.
So then that whole red flag is actually a red herring, right? It's not actually important to the main details at hand. So, so just little points like that. So hopefully you guys found this really helpful.
Yeah.
And stick around for part 2 also.
Yeah. This is good stuff. I'm excited to be doing this. I'm less excited right now. I do apologize, because I am really waning right now. I am in my crepuscular state.
I was going to say,
right
the
now.
problem is I'm the crepuscular one. So I'm very active at night and twilight, things like that.
Yeah.
At dusk.
At dusk.
But Jamie's
like a vampire.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I don't sleep.
I do apologize, but this is really good. I think one thing that we have to remember too, and we would probably have to dig into this a little bit, but we had done in the past dealing with How Should We Then Live with Francis Schaeffer, and he was talking about Thomas Aquinas and Aristotelian kind of viewpoint that the
mind,
that reason is not fallen. Mm-hmm. Reason is fallen, and it's good that we can reason, but the reality of the scripture doesn't trump our reasoning, but we can use that. It's a tool that we have that we can use to determine things like, good reasoning is good. And so what evidence is there for the things that are the most important for us to hold on to, the munchkin, part of that donut, so, and there's a lot of good evidence for those things. So really taking those things out and saying, okay, can I build a case for this? Can I build a case for this? Can I build a case for this? And then, the other stuff, like things that he had brought up, the kind of ancillary stuff, the stuff on the outskirts. What was the word that you used?
Adiaphora.
The adiaphora. That's a good word.
I know. It means like on the peripheral.
Yeah. So the stuff on the adiaphora
I think it's a Greek word, actually.
Is it a noun?
Noun. Noun, you got me all confused.
But anyway, so there is, look for the evidence of the things, that we can really get a hold of, and don't be making an argument from silence, which is kind of what he was doing. It's like, well, it didn't say this. It's like, well,
for the geology,
we haven't found this yet, and it's like, well, okay, so we haven't found that, but what have we found?
Right.
Yeah. And the evidence for the resurrection of Christ is so vast, and the writings of Christ, and not only in the Scripture. It's Josephus, it's Tacitus, it's all of these writers, Pliny the Younger, like all of these writers who are referencing, this Christianity that's going on. What went on at the time. So and the fact that we have a book that has been passed down is evidence in itself. Just because it has a nature of like supernaturalism,
God breathed,
doesn't mean that it's not still accurate. And that's a problem that we tend to have. It's like, well, it's it because of its supernatural origin, or its supernatural kind of
character.
Its character. Well, we can't trust it as historical.
Right.
It's like, well, why? It doesn't make any sense. Because those writings are legitimate writings. They're letters to churches, or they're stories of what these people eyewitnessed. And then to look at the veracity of the accounts and determine, like, well, are people really going to give their lives for a lie that they know is a lie? It's one thing to give your life for a lie that you don't know is a lie. But to give your life for a lie that is a lie. There's so much
and
stuff
changing their whole worldview before being like scared and Peter denying Christ, and then after being a powerful witness. It's like something happened to make that happen. And then starting with the 12 apostles to going to where it is today, and like the explosion of the church. It's like somehow that happened, and that has to be explained somehow. And so that's, like you said, in and of itself. Also, that the Bible speaks of these supernatural things. So if you're going at it from a purely like rational, I need to have this understanding of how could this have happened scientifically, of things that are spoken of in supernatural terms, then you're starting from the wrong spot. Because, the thing that can change the world the way that Christianity did is something supernatural. Because if it's just, what I see and I wasn't there, so we can't know, about that kind of thing. It's called radical skepticism. It's like, that's not how we come to a conclusion about anything. I've never been to Hawaii. I still believe that it exists.
Right. I don't believe Antarctica exists,
Or Australia.
NASA's
penguins. Right. Exactly. So you can still come to like very well-grounded beliefs without having to see something with your own eyes, kind of thing. It's like, well, you can trust the eyewitness of people who were there and saw him die and then saw him rise again. Like those mean something in the court of law. We put people away for life because of testimony like that. So like there can be something there. So
do I have a reason to believe they're lying?
Yeah.
Like, well, okay, so let's weigh that. That has to be part of it. But it's and then the effect that the Scripture has had on the world, that what Christianity has had on the world, and the truths that are in it. And if you follow it consistently and understand it consistently as best that we can, you see how like this is something that is beyond the ability for humans to just kind of come up with, because there's a complete lack of self selfishness, self-indulgence. It speaks against all of that stuff, and it's just not us.
Right.
It is antithetical to our nature. You know, so
well, like you were saying about like original sin, like Adam and Eve, you need them to have original sin kind of thing. It's like whatever you want to say about original sin, like that your kids are not born with like perfection, and then like over time they get worse, kind of, so they see the world kind of thing. It's like they are born with a tendency already against what is good. Right? Like the classic, like you never have to teach them how to tell a lie, but you have to continually be correcting them for the truth. So my point is that things in the Bible that we come to conclusions about, like with original sin and stuff, have manifestations in reality also. And that can't be like done, like just not dealt with at all. Because I can see it with like, why do we need to sacrifice to please God kind of a thing? It's like, okay. But that there's a sin problem in the world. So it's like, okay, what explains that? If you don't have God, then how would you have like a way out of that, and then all the morality and stuff like that. Sure. So like there's stuff in scripture that you have to, I think, if you're being honest, you have to come to it understanding that this is speaking to our world, because we see the need for something to get us out of this like hellhole that we're in of sin. And without something to tell us about where did that come from and how can we get out of that, then you're just left with the sin, but no real way to get out of it, except for like a plateau of platitudes of like be kind to one another kind of a thing. Right. It's like that's not enough to deal with the inherent sin that's within, that is in your own heart.
Sure.
So. All right, guys. So that'll do it for part 1 of this. Please let us know what you thought in the comments below. Check out our sponsors, Born Again Baking and friendsoftodayschoice.org, and leave us a topic that you'd like us to react to, which is our new format that we're doing for now.
We'll be doing one soon, right? After our next episode of
this.
Yes. We'll be doing one that was presented to us.
Yep, absolutely. Yeah, talking about postmillennialism, preterism, and kind of like the end times from maybe a different perspective than
oh, it sounds so terrible.
We were brought up, and lots of big words. So no, we can't wait.
I can't wait for that.
Yeah. So stick around for part 2 next week, and we will see you guys then. And remember, this is me.
Yeah.
And remember, this is so important.
Say it backwards.
This is so important, so I better get it right. Remember, the gates of hell will not prevail against the Church of Christ.
Amen.
He has all authority, and by his strength, we are taking back ground.
Take it to the bank.
Amen.
All right.